If you've ever looked at two commercial spaces and tried comparing the rent between the two, there's a good chance you've done it wrong and you don't even know it. Welcome back to Small Business CRE, episode 6. Today, talking about the difference between a gross lease and a net lease or a triple net lease in commercial real estate leasing. Let's get right into it. So, what we're going to cover today, first off, talk about the difference between the two, gross and net, and the different types of those leases because they break down even further from there. Which types you're most likely to encounter as a small business owner in a smaller or Midwest market, two big common misconceptions, and then what you can and you can't negotiate when you're trying to lease a commercial space. So, who am I? My name is Dan Logan. I am a commercial real estate agent. I've been working with small business owners in my local market for a number of years now. I've helped over 100 business owners, insurance agents, auto detailers, mechanics, equipment, construction crews, anything like that, get into commercial spaces and lease commercial spaces. And this is a very common question I've gotten is trying to, tenants and small business owners trying to understand the difference between a gross lease and a triple net lease. So, okay, the core concept here, what we're talking about, is really you're paying for the same thing. So in all reality, a gross lease and a triple net lease, they're the same thing. It's just packaged differently. Usually you're going to pay the same amount either way. Like it has to be covered. But the way they're structured is different. So really simply, just a dictionary definition, gross means a total. It is the total number. It's one number that covers everything. Whereas net means that the operating expenses are broken out separately from the base rent. So gross lease versus a net lease. Gross, again, is one number. And the landlord, if you remember, the landlord is estimating their operating expenses and they are baking those expenses into that gross number. So, they're charging you X amount and they're assuming that their expenses will be Y amount. And then that's, the gross is that total amount. So you're paying a total base rent plus a hidden operating expense rent. And that's the net. So in a net lease or a triple net lease, the landlord is actually breaking that out into two numbers. So the landlord actually passes the operating expenses through to you as a tenant as additional rent, triple net rent. So you're paying a base rent plus a triple net, and they're two separate numbers. So to try and explain that better, let's just talk about a quick analogy. Let's say you're going to the store. You're buying a thing of bananas, a bushel, a bunch of whatever bananas. In the gross lease scenario, you park at the store, you walk into the store, you grab the bananas, you go check out the register, and you pay $3 total. That's your total cost. You paid one number. However, in a net lease scenario, those expenses get broken down. So you park, and it's 50 cents. And you enter the building, and it's 50 cents to cover utilities and building expenses and all that. And then you go buy the bananas, and they're $1.50 is what the bananas actually cost you. And then you go to the cashier, and that charges you 50 cents for the labor. And in total, it's $3 again, but it was broken out. That's a gross lease versus a triple net lease. Gross is one number. Triple net is breaking it out into the separate expenses of that lease. Now, different types of leases, primarily net leases. So again, triple net, that's the net. Technically, each net is a different item. So you might run into, these are less common, but you might run into a single net lease, which is where you're paying the base rent plus the property taxes. A double net is the base rent plus property taxes and insurance. And then a triple net, we you'll most commonly see is base rent plus property taxes, insurance, and CAM, which is your common area maintenance. Think landscaping, snow removal, utilities, etc. The operating expenses of the building itself. Occasionally, there is a thing called an absolute triple net or a true triple net lease. And this is where a tenant actually pays for everything. So if the roof needs replaced, the tenant pays for it. The tenant actually pays directly the taxes and insurance. Like the tenant handles everything, and the landlord just gets their one check each month, and that's all they do. These are not very common. This is mostly only with big corporate tenants, thing like a Starbucks or a Walgreens, something like that. And then what you will actually see for gross leases, sometimes you will see just an absolute gross lease where you just pay the one amount, but usually you'll actually see a modified gross lease. And this is where you're paying a flat rent amount, but then usually you also pay for utilities on top of that. So you might pay the utilities directly to the utility company, electric, gas, whatever it might be, and then you pay your rent. So technically it's a modified gross lease, but everyone just refers to it as gross. What you need to really do is read your lease carefully and understand these, because there's no one size fits all. There can be a lot of variation lease to lease, just how it's written. So you just have to understand that going into it. Okay, which ones are you most likely to encounter? So it really depends on what type of business you are, what kind of market you're in, what type of building. Generally speaking, nicer, newer buildings, think Class A buildings or big strip centers, or malls, those will usually be triple net. If there's multiple tenants in that one building, oftentimes it's going to be triple net. A big giveaway is if it's a newer building or if there's professional property management in place, usually triple net. It's just a cleaner way to track those expenses. Where you are more likely to see gross leases, especially if you're in a smaller market, are smaller single tenant buildings or older buildings, or if it's a landlord who's maybe more local and maybe they only have one or two properties. They're not like a professional landlord, and so they just charge a flat gross monthly rent. That's just easier to track and manage. But in general, if it's a newer building, if it's got multiple tenants, and if there's professional property management, you're probably looking at a triple net lease versus a gross lease. One thing I want to clarify is just an opinion here. Some tenants and business owners, they think that triple net is some kind of scam, or the landlord's trying to pull one over on them, or charge them extra rent. That's really not what it's meant to be at all. Sure, occasionally you're going to get those bad apples. You're going to get landlords that try and sneak in extra costs. But the reality is, triple net is actually meant to be a much more transparent, above board way to run the business. Again, think of that building as a business, because the landlord or the property manager has to break down all those expenses and show you exactly what they were and justify the triple net rent you're paying. And then you can actually see what those expenses were versus in a gross lease, you're just paying a total amount and you have no idea what the expenses were. So triple net actually can be a lot cleaner way to do it. It can take a bit more work to kind of put in place and track those numbers. But you as a tenant can at least see exactly what those costs were and reconcile that. Okay, this is the big problem that a lot of small business owners I see that they make is if you're going and you're looking at multiple spaces, you're on LoopNet, you're on Correctly, you're on your local MLS, whatever it might be, and you're looking at spaces, the way that net leases or triple net leases are generally advertised is that it'll just list the base rent and then it'll say triple net. So in this case, it would say $12 a square foot and it doesn't actually say what that triple net dollar amount is. It's not usually listed in the advertisement what the triple net is. So, okay, you just saw it's $12 a square foot. Then you go to the next property over here and you see it's listed as $15 a square foot gross. But but that's the total cost. But if you don't know what you're doing, you'll think, oh, this triple net deal, it's $12 versus 15, so I'm saving $3. What you don't know until you ask the right questions or until you get to the lease or until you start paying rent, even worse, is that there's a $3 triple net additional rent. And so, now you're actually paying the exact same amount, but you didn't know that ahead of time and you disqualified that gross property earlier on. So just make sure you're always comparing apples to apples and you need to ask the question, hey, what's the triple net on this property? What's the estimated triple net? Or it should be in the lease. The landlord should be able to answer that question or at least give you a good estimate. Again, those numbers do vary a little bit, but they should give you a good idea so you can compare the two apples to apples. Yep. Okay. The rule always asks for an all-in monthly cost before you compare two spaces. So you need to make sure you're comparing the total final dollar amount and also be like, okay, am I paying utilities in this space or am I not paying utilities here? That has a difference. So the advertised rent on a triple net lease usually doesn't include the triple net amount, it just includes the base rent. So you need to ask for that separate number so you make sure you actually know what you're comparing as far as looking at two spaces. Okay, I think that's the last thing I want to talk about, but when you're going to negotiate a lease, if you're doing it yourself, you don't have a broker or an attorney helping you, you just, I guess, to not appear uneducated or like you don't know what you're doing, you don't negotiate on the triple net dollar amount. So in that previous scenario, if it's a $12 square foot base rent and a $3 triple net, you don't go to the landlord and say, oh, I'll pay you $2 for your triple net, not $3. Those expenses are what they are. The landlord knows what the triple net is. So it's $3. Don't go in there and try and change that amount. What you can do is you can try to negotiate the base rent. So instead of trying to negotiate down the triple net, you try and negotiate down the base rent. So ask for $11 a square foot base instead of 12, not 2 and 3. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. You look foolish doing it. So yeah, negotiate the base rent. If it's a gross lease, then you can just negotiate the total because again, that landlord is just baking those costs in. So then you would negotiate the total. What you can do is you can, once you get that lease and you see it broken down of what exactly is included in triple net, because again, triple net can really vary what all is being lumped into that. then you can push back on some things and be like, well, I don't think property management should be included in the triple net. Or if you see, oh, HVAC repairs are included, I don't really want to do that. You can try and push back on some of those things. If it's a big landlord with lots of properties and lots of leases, they might not be willing to change that just so it's all the same across leases. But that's what you can do is you can clarify and just make sure you really understand what's included in the triple net, but don't try negotiating down the dollar amount. Negotiate on the base rent, not the triple net. Okay, bottom line, gross versus triple net. There's not a case of one is better than the other. You just need to understand the structure, understand what is actually in there, understand what you're getting into. You need to know what type of lease you're looking at, know the all-in cost, the total rent, especially for triple net, before you do anything, and then negotiate on the right items. Don't negotiate on triple net. Triple net is the operating expenses of the building. They generally are what they are. All right, with that, thanks for watching. If you're looking at leasing a space for your small business, I've got a free PDF link down below explaining the top 5 mistakes I see small business owners make when they're leasing commercial real estate, and some of them can really cost you a lot of money. So check that out if you want. Until then, like, subscribe. See you next time.